สวัสดีค่ะ Very pleased to welcome our guest speaker today. Long-term relationship with one of our outstanding Professor Shabir Givala. And today we will have very outstanding talk about growth and innovation. So I hope that the audience are all there already, and we have both on site and online. This is our first JGSEE Talk in the hybrid format, and we hope that we will have all the questions and interaction with our speaker as usual. This series is actually developed at JGSEE in order to not only to disseminate our knowledge from inside the school, but also get outside from our partners. How can we work together? What kind of topic, what kind of innovation based on research and development, of course. And to introduce our speaker, I would like to invite Professor Shabir Givala, who is the hub of this collaboration.
Thank you. Sawadee krap and good morning to everybody. Welcome. He is one of the very early developers of aquatic modeling since the 1970s at the Danish Hydraulic Institute, where he worked as a researcher and then also as a research manager. He has many years of experience. I know him especially because he was my teacher at the Asian Institute of Technology 25 years ago. In 1997-98, where he taught me mathematical modeling of aquatic systems. Currently, he is having a company which works with food, environment, energy, and so on, many things. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome my teacher and a very outstanding professor, Mr. Carliver Dalmatson.
Thank you. Thank you very much for these nice words of welcome. I am so happy to be back in Thailand. It was such a great time when I was working with your distinguished Professor Shabir and also many other people. And now can I forward it myself? Yes, I can. Or should I ask you? Yeah, please forward. Oh, yeah, give me the pointer. That would be nice. Thank you. Yeah, let me have a look. Forward this. Yeah. So my talk is about growth unlimited, and people are a little bit puzzled by this expression, but I can actually argue that we, within the lifetime of the universe, will be able to grow infinitely to a great state of the world. And here are, what happened? Oh, yeah, sure. As Shabir said, I'm originally an expert in mathematical modeling. That's what brought me into the climate issue, because I could see that the models used for climate modeling was not professionally done. So that was my first idea about that. Besides these former positions, I'm also now part of the board of directors of the major Danish sea cage farm. So I have used a lot of my time in aquaculture And I'm also chairman of a Danish digital media company. And the CEO is my daughter, Signe, who sits there. And we hope in a while to go to Thailand and make our company grow also there. So that's nice. Okay. This was the happy days of Thailand. And what you see here is the picture from my farewell party to Thailand. And you can see a circle around all my students. There were many and they were quite happy. Sometimes they were a little bit afraid of what they should do, and then came and asked me, how can I do better? And I simply said, work harder. And they liked that. So that was okay. And I had a couple of students from Vietnam, one from Sri Lanka, one from Cambodia, and one from China, and one from Thailand. And then Shabir, I was a part of his teaching, but the real master was the late Professor Haramos, which you are seeing in the top of the picture. He was a pioneer in modern environmental engineering. Among other, he introduced hard mathematics in the field, which made it much more engineering and not trial and error. He is a great, great success. However, it's a very amazing and a little bit tragic story. Originally, environmental engineering was called sanitary engineering. But this guy, he actually died from antibiotic-resistant microorganism at a hospital. Within 1 day after getting the infection, he died. So that's ironic and sad, but it happens still. And then finally, after I finished my stay at AIT, I organized together with these nice people and very competent people, I organized a seminar called Growth Unlimited, which had some success and also some controversy. So today I will follow up on that and see if what I said at that time still is true today. But before I actually go on, I want you to, I have to do a little bit of business here. I have to log on this thing. That'll be, no, we'll skip it because it's not that important. Okay. You could say that growth without limits and a super abundant world sounds a little bit strange to many, at least in the rich countries, which are much concerned about scarcity. But there's actually a lot of people out there who are in the same field as I am. There is people writing books about fossil future, people are writing books about superabundance. A very important book is Factfulness by Hans Rosling, a late Swedish researcher who showed us that the world is getting better all the time. Steven Pinker, who have written Enlightenment Now, shows that rational thought gives us a lot of good things. And also a Dane called Lars Tvede, who is a good friend of mine, has written a book called Super Trends, where he shows a lot of interesting things happening in the future of the world. Let's have a look at what has happened since I was in Thailand and what has happened in the world the last 100 years. If we look at climate change, we can see that the temperature has increased about 1 degree in 100 years. And we can also observe that the water level has increased about 30 centimeters in the last 100 years. That's it. But what happened to the rest of the world? Look at population. It goes from nearly 4 times more people, which I think is a happy thing. Some people don't like that, but I think it's a happy and good thing. People are nice and interesting and creative and smart. More people is good. Infant mortality has gone down from 22% of all children dying before they were 5, down to 4% in the world as a whole. I just looked up Thailand and Denmark, and both of them are about 0%, a little bit more than 0%. Life expectancy, and that is completely amazing, has more than doubled in this period to 72 years in the world as a whole. The wealth has gone up 8 times, and it's probably supposed to still do that the next 100 years. Think about that. And it's still the double of what the average income is in Thailand, but it's a lot of money. And poverty has gone down from 70% of all people in the world having less than $1 per day to live from. Now it's only 10%. Education, literacy from 32% up to 88%. And raw materials, can look at it in different ways, but there's an index called Simons and Bondesi Index, where you look at how many hours you have to work to be able to procure some service or good. If you look at that, the abundance has increased since 1980 with 7 times. We are 7 times more abundant. And we can see that on the real prices of materials, that they're not increasing. Energy, in 1990, it was 30% who didn't have electricity in the world. Now it's only 10% who don't have electricity. And if we look at the yield in agriculture, we have gone from 1 tons per hectare to a global average of 3.5 tons per hectare, which is also very, very amazing. And we simply didn't have land enough to feed all the people in the world if we hadn't done that. And malnutrition has also gone abruptly down from 65% of all people being malnourished to 7%. Now you could say, has it anything to do with climate change? No, not at all. It's not because we are getting warmer that we are getting richer. It's also not preventing us from getting richer. And here you should note that the International Climate Panel says very clearly that climate change is a minor factor for human development compared to technological development, economic development, institutional development, and so on and so on. So think about that. So that brings me further to my next point. Fear of the future is a terrible thing. You shouldn't fear the future. You should embrace the future. If you fear the future, you get too few children. Actually, my wife and I was a little bit affected by this limits to growth movement further on. And we only got 2 children. I'm happy with the 2 I have, but I wouldn't mind having a few more, and many more grandchildren, of course. And if we fear the future, we make wrong political decisions and we are paralyzed. We shouldn't be afraid. Let's start looking at the population of the world. I'll have to say very clearly that there are no such things as overpopulation or population explosion. We are a smart animal. Homo sapiens. It's a very smart animal. We can actually change the carrying capacity of the Earth by using technology. So when we get more, we also get good at changing the capacity. And of course, we can also adapt to a given carrying capacity. For about 100 years ago, we had in Denmark a very smart sociologist called Esther Boserup. And she saw human development as a movement where you got one crisis after the other, then you used your wits to conquer the crisis, and then you were better off. And then the next crisis came on. So that's what you see here. And you could say that her motto was, necessity is the mother of invention. And she actually showed that Africa was underpopulated. It was so easy to get food just by hunting and gathering that you didn't need to do anything else. And the fantastic thing about us human beings is that we act completely different from animals and bacteria. If a population has to be limited in nature, it will be by increased mortality. Many more will die. But we do the opposite. We adapt by reduced fertility. And that's what you see here, the demographic transition, which is a decline in fertility over the years. In all countries of the world, it's actually happening. And it's very dependent on income. If you have more than, say, 5,000 USD per capita per income, then you really see the start of the demographic transition. So the way to reduce too high population growth, which can happen, is simply to make people rich, not by forcing them or other things. China has done a very, very bad thing for itself and for the world because it enforced low fertility by political means. And to my mind, it will harm China more or less for the next 100 years. Whereas India, who hasn't that kind of problem, they will surely be the major power, maybe the biggest power in the world in the next 100 years, because they have the people and they also have the economic growth. If we look at the development of the world population, we can see that we now are very, very inaccurate, but about a little bit more than 10 billion people in year 2100. And what we can see is that the so-called relative population growth, that is growth, the number of people divided by the population, topped out in 1965. Actually, when I was a high school student, we were all talking about overpopulation. It's not strange because the population growth at that time was 2% per year. That's a lot. And the absolute growth has topped out somewhat later. The biggest issue now is actually the opposite of too many people. That there are scenarios where populations will decline. We see it in Japan. They're looking to halve their population within the next 50 years if they don't do anything. And that's a terrible thing for any country to have a declining population, and very few young people have to run around taking care of me and my wife. That's a tough deal, I can tell you. We also live longer. As I told you before, we have a global life expectancy of 72 years, and that's up from hunter and gatherers. They have about 25 years. We can expect it to rise to 100. A newborn baby girl in Denmark can expect to be 100 years. And are we going to die at all? There are certainly a lot of effort now in longevity research to see if we can live much longer than 100 years. Forever is a long time, and we can die from other causes. I don't know if you know that, but the average death likelihood for a normal young person is 1 divided by 700. And that's not zero. That's actually, so it would make an average life expectancy of 700 years if you just live a normal life. We all get satiated, and I can clearly state that if there is hunger anywhere in the world, it's not because of production capacity, it's because of bad governance, bad corrupt governance, that people are, the president of these countries, they are buying president palaces and helicopters instead of supplying the people with food. But we hear all the time about these food crises, and there are intermediate food crises because of corrupt regimes. But if we look at the total picture, we see a very good increase in production per capita. So people are getting more and more satiated. Actually, now we have as many two fat people in the world as we have too little fat people in the world. It's a major problem for many countries that people get too much to eat. And also we look at the yields of all major crops. It's increasing steadily, and it's out increasing the population growth. But it's not solved. But again, as I say, the solution is not about lack of production capacity. It's about that the regimes don't allow the people to get fed, and they fight instead of making agriculture. Also, the food prices are stagnant in real prices. There's a little uptick now. I'll come back to that, which is caused by energy poverty, which is unnecessary, should be unnecessary, but still in the long run, in the very long run, you can see the wheat prices on the left, and they show fluctuating wheat prices according to weather conditions and so on until about 1800. And then we got the new agricultural technologies, fertilizer, industrial farming, and so on. And from that time on, wheat prices have been going down, and down, except for year-to-year variations. And yields are, as I said, steadily increasing. The global mean yield is only half of the yield which a good modern farmer can do, which actually means that if everybody made agriculture like a smart Danish farmer or other smart farmers in the world, we only need half the area that we need now for agriculture. And we are seeing the effect now. If we look at the world's agricultural area, it has topped out, and we are looking at peak farmland. And we can see if a population which equalizes with a yield which increases will eventually do that we have used much less land for farming, which is very good for many respects, but particularly for nature, because the biggest problem for nature, it's not changes in temperatures, it means very little. It's lack of land. We don't have enough land for agriculture or for nature. And as an aquaculturist, I want to point out that on the sea, we have so much land and we have so much water, of course, so it will never be a problem to feed the people. I'm not saying we have to go to the sea, but we can at least, if we want to, we can produce a lot of our farm products on the sea, and then we can use less land. And if we use technology, and I know you are not so worried in these parts of the world as we are in the West, but we can use gene-modified organisms and CRISPR and all these smart modern technologies to increase the yields in fantastic ways. If we look at roots and tubers, they actually have a production capacity which is 5 times as much as wheat. And it's because wheat, you only use a small part of the plant, whereas for a tuber, you use maybe half of the plant. So if we could change the potato or the beet to make flour like wheat, then we could reduce the agricultural area with 5 times. And then there are the futuristic ways of doing stuff. That's urban farming, vertical farming. It can be done. It's not a problem doing it technically, but it's very, very expensive because you need energy. The smart thing with farming is that it's a solar catcher, and it's a smart solar catcher because it stores the product. It stores the value of product. So that's why we do farming on land. That's because we catch the sun and converts its energy into food. But eventually, if we have an infinite amount of cheap energy, then we can produce all the food in the world in a very small area. Then let's look at the energy situation. We have talked about peak oil and peak coal and for whatever for hundreds years at least. When I was a young student, there was only oil for 25 years. Now there's oil for 40 years. And people say, oh, how can that be? Because we use much more oil now. It's because we are smarter at finding it. We are finding new stocks of oil and so on. And then there are methane hydrates in the sea and so on. So to my judgment, there's at least coal, oil, and gas, which I call stored solar energy. It is stored solar energy. There's enough for, say, 200 years. Then we have the climate change. And I have to say very clearly that it's much better to be rich and warm than cold and poor. And if we look at the IPCC, they do a lot of excellent job, but their models are running too hot. And I know why. It's because they have some very good models, but they don't dare to throw out the bad models. They want to be friends, all of them. So instead of saying this model is obviously bad, you know what Harmos would have said about that? He would throw out the bad models. Also a wetter and warmer climate with more CO2 is good for many things. It's not a major factor, but it is good. So what can we do with energy? If we want to change, we only have one option now, which is fission. The windmill and solar cells are not very good because they don't deliver when you use it. And energy has to deliver when you need the energy, not when you want, not when the wind blows. So they need back off, and that makes them very expensive. So to my mind, it's only the fission which can do the job. And what amazes me is that a lot of people out there who think that climate change is the biggest of all problems, who still don't want nuclear fission, which will more or less solve it. So I think they are not so serious about the problem anyway. So I personally think that we will be using coal, oil, and gas for maybe 50, 100 years. And then eventually when the coal, oil, and gas gets too expensive compared to fission, then we will change. Energy storage is a fool's game. I can tell you about atoms and bits. We are all amazed by the bits technology development, which is orders of magnitudes changes. That's not possible in the atom world. In the atom world, you can do incremental changes, and you will never get very cheap storage compared to other ways. What about the future? Of course, we can have breeder reactors, which can reuse and use more fuel. New types of nuclear reactors. We can have That's my idea. It's an interesting idea to have a solar panel with superconductivity. If you make a belt around the Earth and you have superconductivity, then the sun always shines at one place. And the Japanese are investigating a project where they want to put a belt of solar cells around the moon and then beam the energy down to the Earth. Then there are solar satellites, which I think in the long run will be a very smart option. Maybe not to deliver energy to the Earth, but deliver energy to the factories in space, which delivers materials to the Earth. And then fusion, of course. Fusions is a little bit like when I was a young kid, the fusion was 40 years in the future, and it's still about 40 years in the future. Personally, I think that, of course, it can be done. We know the sun, it's a fusion reactor. So it's proof that it can be done. But we don't know if we can actually take a small sun and put it into a factory. That's not an easy engineering challenge, I can tell you. There are other ways. For 150 years ago, we didn't know about nuclear power. We didn't know it. Maybe one day, one of you will find a completely new energy source, which we have never heard of before, and then we will be laughing at today's problems. One thing we have to do, one limit is we can't use infinite amount of energy in the Earth, not because of carbon dioxide or anything like that, just because of the heat effect. If we grow 2.3% per year, as we do now in energy demand, eventually we can't get rid of the heat and we will die from heat. So we need to decouple, which we are doing. Actually, we are now making more and more value per used energy. So we are decoupling. And eventually, if we really want to use much energy, we have to go to space. Then about scarcity, we are living in a blue planet with abundant materials. Here, the upper curve is the Simon's abundancy index, which is increasing. And you should acknowledge the term known reserves. Many people take the known reserves, divide by the use, and then they get that there are resources for 40 years or something like that. But known reserves is just the part of the substance which we have, which we know, which we have found, and we know that we can develop it for a price we want to pay. But there are at least sometimes hundreds of thousands as much material out there. So that's why we keep on finding more stuff. And if we look at the real resources, that is then the Earth is full of everything. Some of it are very diluted and it's more costly to get it out, but it is there. And then, of course, you could say that if you have eternal exponential growth, nothing is enough. That's true. But we don't have that for the simple reason that we have a limited age. Our sun here in our solar system will burn out in about 1 billion years. So that's a limit for how long we can stay, at least here on the Earth. Let me give you an example. Say you have a nice grandmother who leaves you 1 million baht. Now, that's some money, and you can live for that for some time. But you can see an end of the money. But what if she leaves you 1 billion baht? And it's a little bit more difficult. It can be done, but it's not so easy. And that's the situation for us. We have a lot. About the ways of making things work longer to the end of time, we can use substitution, silicon for copper. We can use recycling, like phosphorus is easy to recycle. And we can use stuff more efficiently. And then we can have it more or less forever. And of course, there's space. There's so much material in space that we will never lack for anything. And there are companies now going out and looking for that stuff. Some of them are very engineer types. They don't know anything of economy. So they think, I will find an asteroid made of diamond or of gold, and then I will be a very, very wealthy person. The problem is, if you find an asteroid made of diamond or of gold, the diamond price and the gold price will drop to about 0. But anyway, there's enough. And then we have the blue planet. As of now, we are appropriating about 20% of the return flow from the evapotranspiration cycle. And that's a lot. Of course, that's a lot. But that's what we are doing. And we also have to acknowledge that all the main part of the water consumption is for agriculture. The rest doesn't mean very much. We need about 1,000 cubic meter of water to make 1 tons of grain. And we need 4,000 liters to make a beefsteak. So that's a lot. Also means that you shouldn't be afraid of using your shower, because your shower is so little water compared to the eating a small steak that it doesn't make any sense to save on hygienic stuff. Don't do that. Wash as much as you want. Of course, we hear about water problems all the time, and there are real issues. The issues are that the water resources are not evenly distributed. Some have ample water resources like Denmark. I believe Thailand also have a lot of water, at least in the summertime. And also many places, the groundwater reservoirs are being emptied, and that's not possible in the long run. So there are problems, but how can we solve them? We should do some smart things. We should pay what it costs. I know many people think that water should be free, but it is not free. Somebody has to pay to take it out of the earth or from the river and clean it and make it available for consumption, and that's not free. So it's better to give some price on water. And I can tell you, you know it probably already, that China has a terrible water efficiency. If you look at the value China produces per cubic meter of water, it's 10 times less than what we other do. And that can be changed if it costs some money to use water. In the old days in Denmark, 50 years ago, when we wanted to cool our beer, we just put it under the cold tap and let it run. But as soon as we had to pay for the water, we stopped. That's a foolish idea. Then there's global trade. You may not think about it in that way, but we are actually moving virtual water around in the world, because if you grow a pig or a kilo of beef, it contains water. So we are exporting to Japan an amount of virtual water, which is about 25% of the water consumption in the Japanese households. And of course, you shouldn't cultivate deserts. It's a fool's game. You can do it. They do it in the Middle East countries. And I can tell you, I think it's Qatar has the world's highest wheat production yield, because they grow it in greenhouses with temperature control and water. But it's also the world's most expensive wheat. So it doesn't make any sense at all. You should grow crops in countries with lots of water. And then these countries should export their food to countries with little water, and then export something back to us. Trade is a solution. We can, if we want to, desalinate and recycle. Desalination is actually not very expensive. The energy prices now, it makes it more, but it's, say, $1 per cubic meter, which is not out of reach for normal families in rich countries for household use. It's not a problem. But for food production, it would make the food terribly expensive. So it's not this will only be the way to do it when you have infinite amounts of cheap energy. Of course, you can cultivate the sea. You don't have water problems there. And just before a small break here, we also can see that the world is getting much more peaceful. Here you see the homicides per 100 people in Europe from 1300s to now. At that time, it was 40 per 100,000 people. Now it's very, very low. And you see this development all over the world. And the wars are getting less. And the people killed in wars are also getting less. It's not a monotone downward curve. It's ups and downs. And now we have a terrible war in Ukraine and so on. But the long-term tendency is, after Pinker's opinion, that we actually get socialized to be a little bit more friendly. We have a custom at the carnival in Denmark, where we go to a barrel and use a stick to kick the barrel. And then there's a black cat made of paper, which falls out of the barrel, and the guy who makes the cat fall out gets a big premium, like Archer, he get a crown or something like that. And what's interesting is that for 200 years ago, it was a live cat which was used for this custom. So now we have a small break, say 10 minutes. Is that okay? 10 minutes, so you can stretch.
So let's take I forgot to mention at the beginning of the talk, I should have done that, but the talk is divided into two parts. So we have the short break of 10 minutes so you can stretch your legs and something. Let's say we'll be back by 11 and we will have the remaining part of the talk after that. And there will be some time for questions. So please feel free. For the students of research methodology, please remember that you have to attend this and there will be questions later on. Okay. So please pay attention. Don't be sleepy. Get your coffees if you need. Yeah. So, yeah. And of course, there's a very good lunch waiting for you after. You see, there's no free lunch. So, okay. Let's be back by 11. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, everyone. You have to use a Kahoot. Some of you know it, some of you don't. But it's very simple. You go into a web page called kahoot.it, and then you put this number into your mobile phone, please, and then your professor will tell you that you have to participate or you will flunk your course. Oh, I'm just joking. So, yeah, nobody up there yet. Yeah, now we have two. And the idea is the guy who wins, he will make my speech next year. Okay. Yeah, it's very good. You can participate also offline. If you're not in the room, you can also participate. But there's a limit of 50 players, so we'll have to stop it eventually. Okay. The last couple. And we start 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, start. You have to answer within 30 seconds. So please answer. You have to answer. Nobody has answered. Doesn't it work? Oh, yeah, I can see it. Sorry. I can see it now. Okay. Yeah. It is nearly halved. So there was eight persons was right. And I will give you a small tip. You have all listened carefully to my lecture, and I have given you all the answers. So if you have listened carefully, you wouldn't have any problem answers. Then we take the next. How many of the world's 1-year children are currently vaccinated against the disease? 80, 50, 20. Yeah, that's fine. That's better. You're coming on. Yeah, very good. So now we take the next. Is the number of deaths due to natural disasters over the past 100 years more than doubled, stayed the same, more than halved? More than half is the right answer, and you got it right, most of you. Very, very good. This guy, Egg. Well done. Next. There's 12 questions. Where does the majority of the world's population live? Low-income countries, middle-income countries, and high-income countries. Middle income is right. It's very exciting. Who will win? Next. Globally, 30-year-old men have gone to school 10 years. How many years for 30-year-old women? 9, 6, 3. Nine years is the correct answer. It's very exciting. Now for the next question. When did the relative population growth, absolute growth, divided by population, when did it top out? 65, 1985, 2005? Yeah, I gave you the answer in my talk, which was when I was a high school student in 1965. Next. UN predicts 4 billion people more by the year 2500. Which group? More children, more grown-ups, more old? More grown-ups is the right answer. Anna, hey, Mr. Egg or Miss Egg is going forward here. Very good. Very well done. How many girls finish primary school in low-income countries? 20%, 40%, 60%? %60 is the correct answer. Yeah. Next. There are 2 billion children aged below 15 in the world now. How many are there in year 2100? $2 billion is the right answer. No, very few will guess that. Next. Next. How many of the world's people have access to electricity? %90, my ladies and gentlemen. Yeah. Next. What is the life expectancy of the world's population? 52 years, 62 years, 72 years. Yeah. "72 years is the right answer. You have listened well. Very good. Next. Too bad for Mr. Egg, Miss Egg. And now the last question. Tigers, pandas, and black rhinos were endangered species in 1996. Are any of them now critically endangered? None of them, one of them, two of them. None of them is the right answer. So it's not so bad after all. And now for the big winner. Number 3. No name. Oh. Number 2. Number 1. Yay! Bravo! Bravo! Let me see the winner. Where? Hey! Very well done. Very well done. You will give my lecture next year. Yes. Could you change hey, where is the guy? Could you change it back to the yeah, please change back to the PowerPoint. Let me explain to you, this is also an experiment in framing. This is a psychological term. If you want people to make an answer to something, you can frame them. And that is, you can, in this case, you can say something very positive, which I have done. So I have framed you to be positive. And you have answered rather positive. I could also frame you negatively, then you would answer more negatively, and the correct way, science way, would be to frame neutrally. So you don't you don't try to influence answers. What is happening is that very few people do well in this test, even if it's public knowledge that it is like this, because they're getting framed by the media and the politicians who are telling them that the world is in a bad state. It's not true. I have Mr. Rosling, who made this test. He has done a study with some of the smartest politicians and presidents of big companies in Switzerland, in Davos. And their result was worse than chimpanzees. You can see there's a likelihood that just by answering randomly, you would get 1/3 of the questions right. But they did worse because they were so framed by what they hear in the media that they simply couldn't answer correctly. Think about that very carefully. The media doesn't tell you anything true about the state of the world because fear sells. It's much easier to sell a newspaper by scaring people than telling them that everything is okay. And also, good things are incremental. You get a little bit richer each year. You don't feel it in the year you get a little bit richer, but after 10 years, you can feel it. On the other hand, a bad thing, somebody dies, an earthquake, depression, whatever happens, you feel it immediately, and there are big stories, both in your private lives and the public life. So that's why people don't get it about the real state of the world. Okay, so let's get on with it. Where did I? Yeah, sure. Thank you. This is a painting of an American guy called Homer, which is showing how it is to be like me, to be a person who tells the truth about the world. That is not well liked. Okay. Yeah. Now, of course, everybody would say, yeah, it may be right that things are going well in many cases, but what about the environment, nature, and climate? And there it is very simple. I taught my students that at AIT in 1997 to 1999, and it's still true. It's the environmental Kuznets curve. Kuznets was originally an economist who showed that if you have a very poor society, everybody are equally poor, and the equality is high. And then when you get richer, you have more inequality, and then if past a certain stage, you get distribution, you get more equal again. My own example is simple. I came from a small village in the southern part of Denmark, and I was the first guy from that village who got a high school exam. And of course, I got to earn more money than my peers. And that's happening all over the place. I had a student at AIT, Miss Nok from Vietnam. He came from a small Vietnamese mountain village. And now she earns so much money that she can feed all her village without any problems. That's really doing something. Anyway, this curve tells you that when you increase growth in population, you have a higher footprint on the environment. And then after a while, when you get rich enough, then the footprint starts to decline. You can see it very clearly if you look at air pollution curves from many countries. And if you look, but for the different factors, stress factors, there are different phases. On carbon dioxide, we are still on the way up. We haven't topped out. On water pollution, you see immediately when people get a little bit of money, they start to buy healthy water because they know that if they don't get healthy water, they will die. And this is just the way it is. I know there are exceptions and it's complicated and so on, but that's the way it is. If you want to solve environmental problems, you have to make people richer. And the worst thing you can do to them is to to not let them get rich. What about pollution? There are something you may not be aware of, but if you look back into the big cities of Europe, you go 150 years back, they were terribly polluted. It was very unhealthy to live in these cities. Copenhagen in 1850 was within walls because for military reasons, and the water was bad and the smoke was bad. And the young women who wanted to give birth or had to give birth, they didn't want to go to the hospital because then they would surely die. So they gave birth at home. That was how bad it is, that it was. And you also have to acknowledge that there are a hierarchy of needs in environments. The most important thing are water pollution and particularly drinking water pollution and indoor smoke, because that kills a lot of people and can actually be helped out with not a big amount of money. Then outdoor air pollution is also still very bad in the world as such. Too many people are dying from air pollution. It's because people are not cleaning their smokestacks from the power plants. They should, because it's not so expensive. But I am also understanding that if you have a certain amount of money and you can use them for cleaning a smokestack or using them for your children's education, you may choose other than I would do. That's fair enough. And then biodiversity and nature is, of course, important for many reasons, but not for survival. Then we have the main environmental problems. It's still, as I said, dirty drinking water and indoor air pollution kills more than 3 million people per year. And air pollution about the same level. What you can see, though, is that the air pollution, outdoor air pollution, the upper curve for the world as such, and you can see the Kuznets curve here, it's topping out about 2000. And it's very different from different countries. Here you can see Thailand, and that's why I think this is, you may have better number, but I'm taking them from the formal statistics, and they say that it topped out in Thailand about 2000, and then for Denmark and United Kingdom, it's gone down. You have to go back to 1952. Actually, 5,000 to 10,000 people died in London from smoke. And then they said to themselves, this should be enough. And they started cleaning up London. In a rich country like Denmark, we don't have much of that kind of problem. We are very concerned with eutrophication, which is the enrichment of water bodies by nutrients giving rise to algal growth. And it's okay, it's a concern, it doesn't kill any people, and it's not that, it's more of an aesthetic problem. We were very concerned with that. But hey, what happened? But something, when I taught for 20 years ago in Thailand, they laughed at me when I said that nutrients was a problem, because they told me to make many fish, I have to throw nutrients into the water, which is also true. But anyway, that's what you see also generally, that the rich world is becoming so rich, so smaller and smaller problems are occupying their attention. Now we have a city in Copenhagen where we can swim in the harbor. It's a luxury thing to be able to do that, but it's actually quite nice. I have been swimming a couple of times. It's quite nice. And I was instrumental in getting it done by using mathematical modeling for making warnings, because sometimes there's a sewage discharge when it rains a lot, and then you make warnings, and then you don't swim, and then you can swim safely again. Okay, then nature biodiversity is a big issue these days, but I have to tell you something which very few people know, that the biodiversity has never been bigger than now in these times. Not exactly now, but in these times. This is a curve which shows that. And it's not strange, because creatures are hard to kill. I mean, we still have crocodiles and sharks, even if they're 200 million years old evolutionary. So it's hard to kill something. But anyway, we are decreasing biodiversity a bit these times, and we should take care, because we don't want to lose species, except some like cockroaches and mosquitoes and viruses which make smallpox and so on. There are some species we're not so happy about. You should also acknowledge one very important thing, and you have a student which are into ecosystem services, and I think personally, I don't want to be insulting in any way, but I think it's rubbish. Ecosystem doesn't do any service to us. We change nature so it does service to us. We make agriculture, then the productivity increases 10 to 100 times, and that's why we live. It's not nature as such which makes us live. But on the other hand, we should take care of nature. If we kill an organism, it may be irreversible. And we also like nature. We like to go out into nature, and we like to, for ethical, aesthetical reasons, we should preserve nature as good as we can. But we don't do that by living poorly. We do that by using technology like agricultural technology, where we make more space. Then there's climate change. You all know about that. There is climate change. It's at least partly human induced, and it will give some problems. And what did myself and my colleagues say in 1999? We said the greenhouse does exist. That's obviously true. However, it's uncertain whether or not the CO2 increase will actually affect the global climate to any significant degree. That we can say now. We can say that it's surely right that the CO2 is warming the Earth somewhat. But we also said it's evident that the proposed cure of excessive CO2 emission reductions may well be far more costly than the disease of global warming. And that's still fully correct. And what you see on the figure is Nobel Prize winner William Nordhaus showing that up to about a bit more than 3 degrees Celsius, it will be more costly for the world to try to prevent the warming than the cost of the warming. That's a very, very important thing. And you should also acknowledge that even if it grabs all the world's attention, it's not at all the most serious issue we have in the world. If we look at the different ways that people get killed, global warming comes far down on the list, and I actually don't believe that number because it's taken out of a hat. What I do know is that in the world dies 10 times more people from cold than from heat. Even in Thailand, I believe people can die from cold because you're not used to cold like we are in Denmark. And if it gets warmer, fewer people will die of cold and a little bit more from heat. But net, we have seen that about 100,000 people are dying totally from than if we hadn't have a warming of 1 degree. Then there are another way of looking into it to see what are different kinds of issues costing the world economically wise. You can see trade problems, conflicts, nutrition, health, gender equality, education, air pollution. They are all far, far bigger problems than climate change. You can see climate change on the black curve down below, and it's increasing a bit. Also relatively, because we are solving the other problems, but we are still not really solving the climate issue. So it will be a bigger problem, but it's still a very small problem compared to many other problems. And that's the idea of one of my compatriots, Bjørn Lomborg. He says that we should use our money for the big issues before we use them for the smaller issues. Then we get more back for the more results for the buck. And what do people think? If you make it, I know surveys are not representative, so it's not science, not at all, but it's still a little bit fun to see that when people are asked which problem they think are the most important, climate change comes last. And I'm quite sure if it wasn't on the list from the start, it wouldn't be mentioned. Of course, in our country, it would be mentioned as one of the first, where it's actually not an issue because Denmark would have no problem with getting 3 degrees warmer. We have an average temperature of 15 degrees Celsius. That's cold. Any Thai would think it's very, very cold. And your distinguished professor arrived to Denmark for 20 years ago in a t-shirt, and he thought it was cold. Anyway, so, and that's right. I mean, for a developing country or for a middle-income country, climate change is not the biggest issue. Biggest issue is still all the other things, education, healthcare, whatever you can think about. How much warmer will it be? And then we have the IPCC. It has a great, there's a great noise or inaccuracy in the statement. They say that the climate sensitive is between 2 degrees to 4.5 degrees for a doubling of carbon. But they tend to overshoot a bit because, as I told you before, they don't throw out the bad models. The good models are the models that give a little bit lower increase in temperature. And it's probably because it's unidimensional. Any of you, I'm sure, at this university, your distinguished professors tell you that problems are often complex. If you're looking for one factor who rules it all, one ring to rule them all, you will probably fail because real problems are complex. And to say that everything about climate is about CO2 is simply not true. You all know the variations in geological times of temperature, and there have been many other reasons. So we have a famous Danish researcher called Henrik Svensmark, who has very well described how solar activities influencing cosmic rays are influencing cloud cover, and it's influencing the temperature. So if you don't take these natural factors into account, you can easily give too much weight on CO2. No doubt CO2 warms the planet. It is a greenhouse gas, and it will warm somewhat, but maybe not as much as IPCC says. And what are the costs? We can, there's a lot of studies by economists saying about agriculture, about extreme weather, about this and that, and so on. So, and they get this non-linear curve, which I personally think is correct, that a higher temperature gives more than just a linear response because we are getting outside our comfort zone. And it shows that if you go up to about 4 degrees Celsius, then the costs are a little bit less than 5% on the gross national product. And that sounds some money. It is some money, but it actually only means that the normal prognosis for wealth in 100 years is that you will get 450% richer. But if you have climate change, you will only get 424% richer. It's an issue. But is it worth trying to prevent it for a high cost? Let me give you some of the myths about climate change, the myths about extreme weather. IPCC is quite clear on that. There are some things like when it gets hotter, there are more extreme temperatures. That's not a bit strange, but there are also fewer cold temperatures. But if we look at hurricanes and all this stuff, all the other stuff, there's actually not observed any change. And most of the change are something which they say will come in virtual climate models. I'm not so sure about that. But anyway, it's always difficult to say what will happen in the future, and there may be a change in a worse direction. But then you have to acknowledge the size of the problem. And the size of the problem is very, very small. All in all, these days, 20,000 people die from extreme weather events in the world. 20,000. That's 20,000 too many. But it's a small amount compared to all the other stuff I have told you about. And it's also very clear that these people are dying in poor, uneducated, sometimes corrupt countries. Because if you really know what you're doing, you shouldn't die from extreme weather. And the costs of extreme weather globally are declining from for 10, 20 years ago, they were about 3 per mil of the global BNP. Now they are 2 per mil of the global BNP. Not a big deal. Actually, it's the same level as earthquakes. We don't have an international earthquake commission telling us to stop earthquakes. I know why, because we can't. Then the myths of climate hunger. It's not true. People are dying from hunger because of corrupt governments, not because it's getting warmer. Because I showed you earlier, the increase in yield is steady all over the world. There is one example of a very, very bad situation food-wise. That's Venezuela. If you look at the low curve, you can see Venezuela halved its food production in 5 years. But that has not anything to do with climate change, because they got a very, very bad government. So we can adapt, any good farmer can adapt to changing temperature conditions and whatever. And actually heat, moisture and CO2 is good for plants. We have seen a greening of the world, about 15% more greenery in the world caused by this. I'm not saying it's a big factor in the food industry, because a big factor is agricultural technology. It's much more important than the climate and weather. But still, it helps. And then the myth of climate diseases, that we will spread tropical diseases all over the world. That's not true either, because the real thing about diseases is that we are getting smart to prevent diseases and using vaccines and so on. That's a much more important factor. We actually have malaria mosquitoes in Denmark, even if it's a cold country. And we had for say 200 years ago, 1,000 people died on a Danish island of malaria. So we know the problem, and we have eradicated. And also here, I mean, if you go 50 years back, there was a big risk of malaria. It's not existing anymore here because you have prevented it. And so, of course, there are links between the frequency of occurrence of mosquitoes and temperature, but it doesn't have to result in any link to diseases, because diseases is prevented by a good healthcare system. And the myths about drowning, it's true that if all the ice melts in the world, and that's a normal situation for the world, is actually a hothouse, no ice at all. That's a normal situation. We're living in a very unnormally cold period now. And but it will take tens of thousands of years, and we can cope with that. I mean, think 1,000 years back and think what we could do. That was when the Vikings in Denmark, they went to England and robbed their cloisters and all of that stuff. And now we can do a little bit more and think 1,000 years in the future. I don't think we can imagine what we can do 1,000 years in the future. We can at least easily move away from a rising sea. The sea rise level now, measured by satellites by NASA, is about 3.4 millimeters. I don't know if you can see an acceleration. I can hardly see it. I have tried doing a regression, and there's a little bit of acceleration, but it's very small. And it's probably not significant to a linear relationship. But anyway, 3.4, that makes 34 centimeters in the next 100 years. What's the problem? We can build dikes. And then there's a myth of the mass extinction. It's completely irresponsible to try to tell people that we are in the 6th mass extinction. A mass extinction arrives when an asteroid hits the Earth, or a super volcano blow out for hundreds of years or something like that. And it's just a few hours, the world is completely changed, and most of the organisms are dead. In the real world, we haven't exterminated in newer times. Actually, we exterminated a lot of species when we were hunter-gatherers for 10,000 years ago. Because our hunter-gatherers, they saw all these big, slow animals, and there was food for months in them, and they killed them. There was a lot, actually. It shows you that it's better to have agriculture, because then you don't have to hunt the big animals. But anyway, if you look at the last 500 years, about 5% of all the animal and bird species have been exterminated. 5%. It's not a lot. And most of them was exterminated for several hundred years ago. It happened in the way that there came some English captain he came sailing to an island. He went in to get drinking water, and he left cats and rats. And the stupid birds and animals at this island, they were not used to cats and rats, and they had no defense, and then they were eradicated. And if we take the insects also, it's 0.08% of the insects and animals and plants that has been exterminated in the last 500 years. Now it's a difficult issue because we don't know how many species there are in the world. There's probably tens of millions, and we don't know more than a few million. But anyway, what really is bad for nature is that we now use biomass and bioethanol for burning. So we take up space which could be used for nature, and that's bad. We shouldn't do that. So then we have the global climate net zero policy is, to my mind, wrong. It doesn't work, because if we look at the coal use and the power plants being built in India and China and probably Indonesia and Thailand and Malaysia, I don't know about Thailand, but in many, and Africa and so on, they built these plants because they want to do the same as we did, get rich by using coal. And we shouldn't prevent them from doing that. And the cost we are using for windmills, which doesn't work well, are very, very high, much higher than the climate costs. So it's a fool's game. And we have now green colonialism, which is that very, very rich people like Mr. Kerry in the United States who are preaching to African people that they shouldn't use coal. And they are actually not happy with that. And I am not happy with it either. I think it's bordering to being evil to prevent people having a good life because it may be a little bit warmer in 100 years. And of course, all these politics hurt the poor most. Just recently, in the last couple of months in Denmark, we have seen an excess mortality of 30% because the gas, partly because the gas prices, energy prices have increased so much that many elderly people have to choose between their medicine, their food, and their warming. And if an elderly person doesn't get warm enough, he may die from many cold-related diseases. So to say to someone, say to the African farmer, you and your children have to live poorly and even die now to present your grandchildren to live less rich than they else would. That is not a good proposition. If we force a net zero policy, it will cost a lot of money. Wind and solar and PTX and batteries and e-cars and carbon capture and sequestration is very, very expensive. And it will kill millions of people from hunger and cold. And it hurts free trade because now the European Union is saying, yeah, we can't get the other guys to have the same policy of us, but at least we can prevent you from exporting to us by putting a climate tax on your imports. I think that's also bordering on evil. Should never do that. And I hope you protest highly, all of you guys from the more sane parts of the world. What should we do? Here you have Mr. Lombard. I don't know if you know him, but you should. He's a very smart guy, written good books, and does a lot of smart things. And you all know the story of the doctor. If he or she has a situation, the first point for the doctor is to do no harm. Because you can easily, when you have a situation, kill people by trying to cure them if you are too rapid in your ideas. So I know that the problem with CO2 discharges will eventually solve itself for the simple reason that coal, oil, and gas will be more expensive than the alternatives, which are nuclear power and probably something new. What we should do, if we have to do something, we could at least abolish all subsidies to energy production. It's a little bit perverse to actually subsidize coal use, which some countries are doing. And they are actually subsidizing the rich people, but the poor people can't afford the gasoline anyway. So it's not a well-thought scheme. You could also, Lombard says that you should do more research and development. I fully agree. That's always a good thing in an engineering university. Yes, let's do some, but it's not easy to solve. I talked about the atoms and the bytes before, and the atoms and the bits. And if it was easy to solve to make a new battery or something like that, you probably have solved it from many years ago. Think about your phones. We all have this problem. Our phones run dry of power within a day or so. It's very annoying. If some company came and say, hey, we have a phone for you, it will last for a month. The battery will last for a month, and it will not weigh more and will cost 5,000 bahts more. We will all buy it. So there's a huge market for such a battery. But it's not developed because it's so difficult to do. And then we'll have to learn to adapt. And there I want to tell you a small story again. When I was at Thailand, I was visited by a group of Bangladeshi engineers. And we talked about building dikes in Bangladesh and adapting to the storm floods. And they have done a lot in Bangladesh. About, I think it was 30, 40 years ago, they had a huge storm in Bangladesh, which killed several 100,000 people. And they said to themselves, never more like that. And then they did some very inexpensive, simple things. They made a warning system, a very good warning system, so that everybody and their mother would know a few days in front when will the storm come. And then they made shelters. So they told these people, go into the shelters, and then nobody died. Very, very few people now die from hurricanes in Bangladesh, and most of them now have mobile phones anyway, so it's easy to get the message out to them. And a little bit, I compare to Holland. If we again go back to the 50s in Europe, Holland had this huge storm surge, killing a lot of Dutch people, and they went as fugitives to Denmark, many of them. And they also said to themselves, never more like that. And they built the best dikes in the world. And they are famous of doing waterworks. They are so good at it. Actually, 1/3 of Holland is below sea surface. So if there were no dikes, there wouldn't be there. So it's not an issue for a modern, well-developed nation to build the necessary dikes. It costs some money, but it's lots cheaper than building windmills. Now we have to look at the real problems. These are global disasters which cannot be solved by our existing knowledge and capacity. And if we don't do anything, we will certainly be wiped out, 100% sure. Here I have some of them. I will go through them, but there are two axes. There are human caused catastrophes and disasters, natural disasters. And there are existential, which simply kills us all, and then catastrophic, which is huge, like more or less like COVID was very close to a disaster because nearly 10 million people died, and that's a lot. Let's look at the natural disaster, which is catastrophic. That would be a new ice age. And that's very sure, very certain that we will get a new ice age within maybe 10,000 years. It wouldn't affect you a lot in Thailand, except you would have a lot of refugees from Denmark because we would be covered in 2 kilometers ice. So we are looking forward to that. Super volcanoes are killing a lot of people, and actually it was very close to killing off all human beings for 100,000 years ago. Solar flares. If a big solar flare comes again, all your electronics, all your mobile phones wouldn't work. You couldn't change money at the ATM. That would be not existential, but it would make a lot of trouble. This is unacceptable. 60 million people die per year. Why should they do that? Why don't we make some research to get rid of this natural disaster? There's a regional nuclear war. And now I have to say something which I wouldn't like to say, but actually now the risk of a global nuclear war is bigger than ever, except when I was a young kid. We had the Cold War, and the United States and Russia, they were fighting and so on. And there was always a real risk every day for a global nuclear war. And it's there again. It's not as big as at that time, but it's there again. But the regional nuclear war between, say, Israel and Iran, or North Korea, South Korea, or India, Pakistan, and so on, could happen any day. It would be an environmental disaster and an economic disaster. And Ukraine, of course. A global depression, a quick global depression would also make havoc all over the world. And of course, the meteors. We have no ways of deflecting meteors yet. Probably will be, and you have all seen the disaster movies, and we will eventually be able to send Bruce Willis to solve that problem. I think that this is solvable. It's not that easy because you have to detect them. And if they're coming strange ways behind the sun and so on, they may suddenly be there. Then what can we do? Twin black holes, which were created at the beginning of time, are swirling around in the universe. If they pass us, they kick the Earth out to millions of kilometers from the sun. They may even engulf the sun. And that would be farewell and goodbye very quickly, I have to say. Pandemics, we all know that. And we have more or less passed through the COVID pandemic now. And it was bad. It is bad, it was bad. I say up to 10 million people died excessively of it. It's a lot. But it's nothing compared to what it could be. It's a lottery. You have three very important things. You have the incubation time, and you have the mortality, and you have the infection message. You look at incubation time, you have viruses like HIV, there's a long incubation time. You don't get sick before after several months, maybe half a year. Then you have high mortality. COVID is a very low mortality thing. Smallpox, other diseases have maybe nearly 100% mortality. And airborne infection, COVID is airborne. Many flu and the common cold are airborne. So if we combine those three, then all the world would be infected, and we would first know that we were affected when we started dying. Think about that. It's a scary thing, but it's actually a true possibility. What is lucky about the situation is that the COVID has learned us a lot about acting quickly. It's very quickly we made a vaccine and so on. So maybe we can react, but we have to think about it. And the problem with being one dimension and only look at one particular issue is that we forget the other much more important issues. Also remember the Spanish flu. It actually killed between 50 and 100 million people at a time in the world where only 2 million people. So that was much, much worse than COVID. And then there's a risk of a totalitarian government. You should fight that at all costs, because a totalitarian, a benevolent government may sound good, but it never is benevolent in the long run, and you can get the wrong people, which would seem virtuous and seem nice, but they would force us to do what they like, maybe to live in an eternal Amish society. And if you do that, you'll be dead, because you can't cope with all these disasters. And artificial intelligence, I hope all of you have tried the new fantastic ChatGPT. I can see now that even in my lifetime, we probably have AGI, that is artificial general intelligence, which is more or less as clever as one of you students, not as clever as your professors yet, but it will come. and it could do bad things. I'm not saying it will. And we are also damned if we do and damned if we don't. If we don't do it, don't research, then maybe some other people we don't like will research things and they will gain lots of power. So we have to develop it and hope that it will work. So finally, why do we need to evolve? We want to survive, of course, and we want the good life, and we want to be many people, because many people has a network effect. The chances of getting a genius is higher. And we should also think about the unborn lives, which are very important. And also because it's fun. Life is fun. It's nice to live. We should enjoy it. It's not always nice. Then it wouldn't be nice. If it were always a dance on roses, it wouldn't be nice. I would mention Julian Simon, who has been a big inspiration, and he says that the life will get better, but people will always think that it's getting worse. There's some truth to that. And economist also says that people like me, they are annoyingly often right. And but against human stupidity, like wars and such things, even the gods fight in vain against human stupidity. There's a very lucky thing here. We don't have to be perfect to survive. If we had to do that, we would be dead. But human beings are very imperfect. We do a lot of bad, foolish, strange, crazy stuff, and still the life is getting better. That's interesting, because if we had to be completely perfect, yeah, you know how it would work. We have to go into space. We have to have our eggs in more than one basket. We have to go to the solar system. We have to go to other planets or other solar systems. And we can't just beam up there. We have to do it this tedious, slow way. And we have the Fermi paradox that we haven't found any life, and I don't think there is any, but that's another discussion. There is a guy called Robin Hansen who says that we have had 3 phases. We have hunter-gatherers, agriculture. Both of them have increased the productivity 200 times. And he thinks that within the next 50, 100 years, we will get another 200 times change in productivity. That sounds crazy, but when looking at ChatGPT, I wouldn't rule it out. And then, of course, we are only using a small part of the energy hitting our planet. If we go to the Kardashev scale, we should do all the energy hitting our planet, all the energy in the solar system, all the energy in the galaxy, and all the energy in the universe. Then we can make room for a lot of nice people out there who will live good lives. That's it. Thank you for listening. Any questions are welcome, and comments, of course. Sure.
Thank you very much for very educational, entertaining, and encouraging talk. I learned a lot. Not the least, I'm encouraged to live longer. But some of the issues, I find it hard to swallow, especially the climate-related issues. But be it as it may, I am troubled by the indicators of progress you showed us in the very beginning with all the global index going for the better. But I feel one item is missing, the inequality. Yeah, that is the root cause of many other things. It's it limits the growth or inhibits global average growth. What do you think of this? And then what are the solutions? Thank you.
Thank you for a very important question. Actually, if we look at global inequality on a person-to-person basis, it's not increasing. The global equality is increasing globally, but within countries, there's an increase in many cases in inequality. And that's not a good thing. I agree to that. I have to say, though, there are two types of inequality. There's an unfair inequality. Say in Mexico, a smart man got political influence and he could buy the telephone company, got one of the richest men in the world. A very unfair way of inequality because rid by taking money from his customers. A fair inequality is a Bill Gates or a Steve Jobs who develops something which everybody wants to buy for their own money, and everybody is better off. Of course, Bill Gates and Steve Jobs now is dead, are much better off, but who does it hurt? And also a good badminton player, you have actually a very good badminton player, also earns a lot of money and is not equal to everybody else. So it's a complicated question, because you can't make a society completely equal, because then there's no incentive to work hard. And you have to have an incentive to work hard. On the other hand, if you have unfair equality based on political connections, like in Mexico and Russia and so on, it's obviously bad. Sure.
Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. You encourage population growth, which I see is a very good thing, and you gave reference to the India as well. In the next few years, they'll be ruling the world because of the increasing population and their technological aspect. So being from an African origin, and Africa is a developing country, and considering the fact that there are so many factors that limit or hinders good lifestyle in Africa, like the economic, the education, the health facility that you mentioned, and the climate change, which you said is least. So should developing countries also encourage this population growth? Will there be a good lifestyle among the population?
First of all, I shortened my lecture a little bit, but I also have some ideas of Africa. If we look at the population scenarios for Africa, Africa will be the most populated continent, and it will also be the richest. You'll go back to the Roman times. You remember North Africa and Egypt. They were very rich countries. And you can go back to that situation. You shouldn't encourage bad population growth is if some parents get many children because they don't know how to support themselves when they are old. That's a bad one. You should only get the number of children which keeps the population moving. If you're a thinly populated country, you get more, but you shouldn't go below. But the African problem is now there's this new green colonialism. Somebody will not let you borrow money for building coal, even if you have a lot of coal and a lot of oil and gas. Should be allowed to do that because electricity is very important. And then, frankly, there are some of the countries in Africa who are very badly governed. You know that well. And that's something, we'll go 150 years back or 200. Denmark was also very badly governed. Some would say it's still not that well governed, but that's enough. It's at least it's some form of democracy and not very corrupt. But anyway, so you have to solve it yourself. One bad thing I think we Europeans did was all this kind of development aid. It's what you call it. It's not dignified. It's not dignified to receive money from someone. It's dignified to do good production you sell to us. So we should allow you to do good production and buy it without any trade restrictions. That's what I think we should do. But you have to get rid of your bad government yourselves. We can't do that. Nation building doesn't work. Thank you. Sure.
Okay, thank you very much for the nice presentation, and I really like it too much, and it is very interesting. My question is that, as you have mentioned, the fertility rate is decreasing, and the productive age is also decreasing. What is your view on the future? Is it overpopulation is a problem, or underpopulation will be the problem?
Yeah, you surely know the answer after all I have said already. I think that it's a big problem if the population will decline. If it is steady, it's okay. But I also think that eventually we will make so much technological breakthroughs that the 10 billion is not anymore the limit for how many people we can stay on the earth. At least if we go to space, we can multiply by thousands. So that is what I would prefer. I'm not personally a religious person, but I like the Christian idea of populating everything. And I like the idea of populating the universe. We should do that. Thank you. You can always contact me through WhatsApp, which Shabir has learned me how to use. So anyway, if you have any questions or want to see more, you can do that. Okay.
Thank you so much for a wonderful lecture. I am from Pakistan. You mentioned all the issues, population, bad governance, and food, poverty issues, climate change issues. But you focused less on climate change.
Yeah.
In last year in my country, yes, all the issues happened. Bad governance, corruption, everything happened in Pakistan in last year. But the most of Pakistan was most affected last year due to climate change. Yes, there was a worst condition, like there are floods, and we lost a lot of things due to flood. And according to you, climate change is affecting least to all over the world. But yes, countries like Pakistan and other countries, they are affecting. In last year or in last few years, glaciers are melting. The world biggest glaciers existing in Pakistan, and they are continuously melting. So yes, maybe the developed side of the world is not affected by climate change, but countries like Pakistan, they are under effect of climate change. We are student of climate change. So yes, we think there is effect of climate change in some particular part of the world.
I don't agree. Storm floods have happened all the time in Pakistan for ages. There's nothing new about it. It's a new thing is that there were many more people living in the exposed areas. And think about it in this way. You give the government a very good excuse if you say it's climate change, because the government can say, oh, it's climate change which kills people, and this is the bad guys in the West who's killing us. The people who are killing Pakistanis is the bad government who didn't do like the Bangladeshi, which introduced dikes and warning systems to not come into that situation. Because you all know, even if there were no CO2 discharges, there will still be extreme events all over the world. So I don't agree to that. I'm not saying there couldn't be a part, say, if it's warmer, the air can have a little bit more water and the rains may be a little bit more stronger. But it's still the adaptation. That's a modern, rich, well-governed country can adapt to anything. And if you look at the United States, there's a lot of hurricanes, very few people are dying. So your issue is to get a good government who will make you rich. And Bangladesh is actually, it's growing faster than
Yes, I mentioned already there are a lot of issues except the climate change in my country. Yes, I accept it, but there is some role.
Yeah. I'm not
Yes.
saying it's zero. I'm just saying that the major issue is good governance.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank
You're welcome. Sure.
It's true that Pakistan has bad governance, but in case of China also experienced the worst droughts last year in his history, like in China's history, when China is rich also. So what you will say about that?
I don't know about that if you say so, but in its history, that's actually a very, very long time. Which kind of records do you have? And also, if you get back in time, very few people lived at that time, so you can't see the same thing. And furthermore, I don't think any Chinese died from hunger, because they live now in a modern world where they can afford to import things. So you may be right. I'm always skeptical about this biggest weather event ever, because I look back into the weather history. I can give you a good example. In Denmark, we have had an event in 1300, where the water level was 5 meters above what we have now. Oh, if it came today, everybody would say that was climate change, but it's nothing to do with climate change. Climate change increases the level of the water, and so a 5-meter event would be 5.3 meter event. It's a little bit worse, but it's not much worse. So anyway, I'm just saying that the modern Chinese were not that affected. The economy was affected. We had the same in Denmark for 2018. We also had a worst drought since 1947. And the agriculture produce decreased with 20%, but it was still higher than the agriculture produced for 20 years ago, because it goes up and up. And so even a 20% decline doesn't make it lower than it was. So modernity will solve these problems. Even I accept there could be a climate component in these things. I accept that. It's not very sure that it is, but it could be. But it's nothing compared to the man's decision. Government and people's decisions, they matter much more than weather and climate.
If we will not have this climate issue, will it not be relatively more high, like the economic growth and everything else?
Yes. Hello. Oh, yeah. As I mentioned, this Nobel Prize winner Nordhaus, he says that it can cost, say, 5% growth, but it's in 100 years where we have. So it costs something. I agree to that. At least I'm skeptical towards all these crazy scenarios, but at least it costs something to build dikes, and the water level will increase. But it can easily cost much more to try to prevent climate change by the wrong means, and that you have to weigh these two factors against each other, and you should not think of only one thing. That's a very, very important thing. Think of if you have a company, a person, or a government, there are more than one problem. If you only try to get one problem, you will solve none. Yeah, det er fint,
Sorry, sir. Sir, thank you very much. First of all, I've been very fortunate to listen you, professor of my professor. And I have a question regarding your stance is very clear about climate change and other issues. And I just want to ask about if there is not a bigger issue like climate change, eutrophication, acidification, and what about the carrying capacity? What you have mentioned in your slides, they must have some threshold. What if they cross that threshold limit about carrying capacity? Can you elaborate, please?
I did get that with the acidification, but I didn't get with the threshold. Please explain it once more.
Sir, you mentioned about carrying capacity of Earth.
Sure.
Yeah. Carrying capacity of Earth, it can adjust if you change your behavior.
Yeah.
It can adjust. What if it crossed the threshold?
Yeah.
It cannot be restored. What if that?
Let me take the acidification first. I don't like to call a process which is making the ocean a little bit less alkalinic for acidification. It's a de-alkalinization problem. The ocean is alkalinic, 8.2 or something like that. And there has been a small decline in pH and not a small actually, but an increase in CO2. It doesn't worry me at all because the ocean has existed full of life for 550 million years with lots of life and multicellular organisms with much, much higher CO2 and much higher temperatures than now. So, and particularly oceanic organisms, the food chain is from algae. And algae is a fast evolving species because it has a reaction time of, it multiplies within a day. I mean, it will very, very quickly adapt. And this rubbish about the corals, it's rubbish. Corals has existed in much warmer and much more CO2 dependent period. Now about the carrying capacity. At a given level of technology, that's my point, then there is a capacity. I think the capacity now is that 10 billion people can live comfortable lives, at least as good as in Denmark, all of them. But then now could be that would be a little bit difficult. But that is the existing technological level. I can easily foresee artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, lots of other technologies which will increase the carrying capacity a lot. If we will use that to be more persons on the Earth, I'm not so sure. I think actually we'll go to space, but future generations have to do that. But you're right, and with a certain technological level, there could be limits.
Thank you very much, sir.
Okay, thank you very much for giving me the chance again. My question is that how can we escape from the effect of green colonization in this era of globalization and capitalism? Because people are using their money to force, or even they are trying to govern the other country because they have money. And for example, we are in Ethiopia, I'm from Ethiopia, for example, we have oil reserves. when we want to use that oil reserve, the American gangsters and others come and they said, we are going to extract and you are not going to use. And then if you are not obeying us, we are not going to fund it. And that kind of thing is going on. So
yeah, as I said before, I'm disappointed and angry with my fellow people in the West countries that they do like that. That's bordering to be evil. Shouldn't do that. But you have to fight against it. I mean, you have fought against other kinds of colonialism earlier, and you got rid of it. India in 1946 or something like that, 48, and you can get rid of it. And there's two things. There's a self-feedback process. If we do stupid things in the West, we don't grow our economy. If you do smart things, the other countries, you grow your own economy, you will get much richer than us, and then you can tell us. And then capitalism is not that stupid. It's rather smart, at least if it's a market capitalism and not crony capitalism. It will go where the money is. And it thinks for the time being that the money is in this kind of greenery, because everybody and their mother are talking about it all the time. But when it shows up that the investments are bad and they lose money, they will go to where they can earn money. So I don't think capitalism is out at all. And I think you should fight back. What you should do is you should tell this publicly. I know particularly the Chinese, partly the Indians, but particularly the Chinese, they like this situation, that we are hurting, damaging ourselves and our economies, and they're actually selling their windmills and solar panels to us because we can't produce them efficiently. There was a guy, the old communist called Lenin. He said, I can sell the rope to capitalism, which it hangs itself in. And that's what the Chinese are doing now. So they're laughing. But at least India, which is a more democratically ruled government, to my mind, the better government, they should speak out. Speak out, say, we don't want this. We will not go with this United Nations foolish things. We will do what we want to do, and you can go, I'm sure you would not say something like that, but we don't care what you think. We will do what we want for our people. You should say it very loudly, because that would make a difference also in the Western countries. Thank you for the question.
Okay. First of all, we would thank you very much for your insight and another view of probably this has, I hope, opened your mind on the other side of climate change and also the role of research and innovation, especially in technology. And we do hope that this would help humanity to grow better, whether unlimited or not, of course. To express our appreciation, I would like to ask you to coming up again and on behalf of JGSEE, we would like to express our appreciation. And at the same time, there would be a group photo so that we see the speaker and we see also the attendees, on-site attendees, of course. Maybe we can take another photo, a group photo, so that people who are online can see us as well. for your information. If you have any questions from the online tool. So as informed to all of you, as Professor Shabikiwala has informed you, lunch will be served. Before leaving, please take your lunch. We have the lunch boxes will be available just in front of the room. And thank you very much for joining this important JGSEE talk. And we will continue this series shortly. We hope that we can come up with once a month so that we keep this very active. Thank you very much for your attendance.